to Latta, and I'm a Bay Area native, parent of 3 kids, 2 OUSD students at West Oakland Middle and Prescott Elementary, and then I have a 3-year-old who is still in preschool. I'm a nurse midwife at a community clinic, and I've been a parent, volunteer, and organizer with Equity Allies and Integrated Schools for 8 years. And I have also been was parent liaison for Schools and Communities First, the initiative to try to reform Prop 13 to bring more funding to our schools. Also on Measure H, which passed thankfully to continue our investments in high school, career, and college pathways. And also served on the superintendent's equitable enrollment working group to help identify ways in which our enrollment system can serve families better and to help tackle the segregation within our district. And I, have always been very engaged with ways to make the world more equitable, and have dedicated my career to doing that, and decided to step up and run when, I think as a parent feeling like there's so many wonderful things that are happening in the district that I think we all do a poor job explaining and promoting. I also feeling like that we do have a lot of challenges in the district around equity and excellence, and just I think it's also just facilities and safety, and understanding which, I don't think that needs to be all parents on the school board, but feeling like there was a disconnect between what was happening on the board and the communities and schools that they serve. And so feeling like I wanted to take the relationships I have, not just in District 1, but also working across Oakland with schools in every single district, to help make the district better and get us through the next set of challenges. I think, as I said in my questionnaire, my priorities are around an equitable and just budget, and equity and excellence at every school, retaining and recruiting teachers and staff, and also community accountability and transparency.
Cool. Thanks for that intro. So the first question.
Sorry, really quickly before I go
yes.
to the first question. Hazen, I wanted you to introduce yourself.
Hi. Sorry I'm so late. I had a meeting that ran over, but my name is Hazen Thomas, and I taught within the Oakland High School District, ran schools, was principal, and have worked in Oakland around public education for over 30 years. Nice to meet you.
Cool. So first question is related to budget and declining enrollment. OUSD, as you know, is facing a budget shortfall, and to make matters worse, the student enrollment is continuing to decline now for the 6th year in a row. Oakland is operating far more schools than other similar sized districts, which is leading to inadequate resources supporting these open schools. What actions would you take to address these enrollment and budget challenges as a school board member?
Yeah, so from my perspective as an organizer, I do think that we need to approach school closures and consolidations very differently than we have in the past, because I know that the schools that we have closed have predominantly affected students that come from, backgrounds with, tend to be higher numbers of students with disabilities, tends to be higher numbers of Black and brown students who have significant disabilities, such as the medically fragile programs. And so for me, making sure that whatever we're doing to move forward on closures, that it is a process that is really transparent and clear around what our goals are and what we're providing to those communities when we're talking about closing their programs. And then the other, in terms of the budget, although there has been declining enrollment, the pace has slowed, and the investments around the enrollment stabilization project have actually seen increased enrollment in TK, especially as the universal TK program expands, and around middle school, which middle school enrollment has increased, and the focal elementary schools that were targets of the enrollment stabilization effort also has seen increased enrollment. And so part of my priority around enrollment is continuing to fund that work and to prioritize it so that we can continue to grow our enrollment Second is to fully implement transitional kindergarten for every child in Oakland. We have not had spaces for every student who is eligible. We don't have an equal number of TK spaces in elementary schools where we have kindergartens, and that's just, I think, a failure of serving families well, and also preparing students academically. We know TK is really evidence-based for helping students get to reading by second grade. And third, it's also from a budgetary standpoint, doesn't make very much sense strategically. So those would be the things I talk about. And then the third thing around budget, which no matter what myself or other board members are able to do around growing the pot, there are going to be some hard decisions that are made. So the way that I would approach it is making sure that we're focused on the services and the staff and the programs that are serving students, that are student facing, that are focused on student achievement and student experience. And I think the other thing would be around making cuts that are specific to each site and the populations and programs at each site instead of across the board cuts. Because I think it is more challenging, and we have done that as a district previously, but it will take an engaged board member, which I think is why I decided to step up.
Thank you.
You're the OEA endorsed candidate in this race. There have been instances over the past few years where the desires of OEA have been contradictory to the best interests of the student. As potentially the only parent on the board if elected, parents in your district would look to you to prioritize the needs of students. How would you balance what OEA is demanding from you if or when in office, given their support during your candidacy, with the needs of students?
Yeah. I think that's a really common question that I have heard, in District 1 and I think across the district as well. And I am proud to be endorsed by the Oakland Education Association. However, I'm also do think it's important to have somebody who is independent from the union and is able to work with folks who want to, push the union to be more, I think, engaged in the community around the ways in which community has felt not listened to by the union. I think we have a similar problem, with the union as we do with the district, which is I think sometimes parents feel like they aren't heard, and that's why there has been this, I think, pushback around the support for teachers union, especially around the last strike. But I think that, for me, I know that teachers, as part of the union, although of course every staff in our schools is really critical to making sure that we're able to have a high quality and academically excellent district. And so I also think it's really important that whoever is on the board is able to work with the union in a way that's respectful, because they are all of our teachers, and is able to help be a mediator between the union and the district, and knows when the union is asking for things that are that are deserved. I think we still have a compensation gap here in Oakland where people have to take a pay cut to choose to work here. That's a huge problem. So versus things where we need board members who know when to walk away and are willing to walk away and go go against the union. So I think it's important to strike that balance. I will say the other thing that I would just add is that I think as a parent, and this, I think I've heard this from a lot of parents, is also feeling that the tone from kind of all sides last spring around the strike was really counterproductive in terms of helping us get to a resolution and helping the union and the district come to a resolution. So I think that would be the other thing that for me I'm really committed to, is working with everybody, even if I disagree on like 99% of things, just continuing to show up and listen and work with people on whatever we can agree on, and also making sure that we're keeping student experience and academic achievement at the center of everything that we're doing. And that definitely will mean making probably everybody unhappy. The union unhappy, the district, I think I'm realistic about that.
Got it. Thank you. next question. So what are the things that the district needs to do in order to improve its outcomes in math and literacy? Additionally, how can OUSD close the achievement gap among Black and brown students?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is, we did in the spring, I think Director Thompson led the way on passing a resolution to help kind of like refocus our district on achievement amongst Black and brown students, which have historically lagged behind significantly. Other groups, white students and Asian students. And so I think the first thing is that doing really deep work as a board, and I think this is gonna live in the academics subcommittee. And obviously because of the elections, we don't know who will be on that committee, but I think whoever is on that committee needs to be held to a high standard from even their colleagues that are not on that committee around monitoring the outcomes for Black and brown students, and particularly around the second grade reading levels. We also need to make sure that our middle school students are catching back up because they had some pretty significant backsliding on their achievement during the pandemic and afterwards. We do have a lot of data around kind of students by background. The other thing I'll say, though, that I have found is that, and just my experience as a parent and in working in schools across the district, is that there's a way in which, because resources are not distributed equitably based on student need, I don't think that we're capturing what a lot of our students know, particularly students who are concentrated in the flatlands of Oakland. I really felt the ways in which, because we're not able to fill our support staff positions, to fill teaching positions, that in some schools, and this includes schools like my kids are in these schools, they're doing iReady tests, but they don't have any support, so they're sat in front of a computer and there's nobody to ask questions. Oftentimes the teacher that is there, even though they kind of, again, can teach a child to read, to troubleshoot this new programming, and there's a lot of curricula that we're asking teachers to learn quite quickly, especially multi-subject teachers who, and really elementary teachers, who are needing to understand the new math, the new SIPS curriculum, and then are trying to support their students through these tests. So I think that we also need, in some schools where we have, I think, strong leadership, we have resources to bring in volunteers, to bring in tutors, to help during testing times, to make sure that we're, again, I think providing that additional support. Because again, I have seen kids sit, and these are my kids too, and I think a lot of probably like Megan, you had young kids at home, and you're doing iReady with them, and you're thinking, you know the answer to this. And they will say it to you, and then they'll press another button. You're like, something is not connecting around this program. So I think that's one piece around just making sure that we have adequate support staff at every school, that we're making sure that we're prioritizing ongoing professional development and giving teachers time to really internalize the new curricula. And then I think having central support from the district around deploying experts that we have many experts in the district, in the Office of Academics, who can help, I would say, troubleshoot and help teachers learn the back end of iReady, which is really how they can make that computer learning more powerful and targeted to help us close achievement gaps.
Good, thank you.
Great. We have about 10 minutes for follow-up questions. So, any follow-ups? Anyone want to go first?
I have a question. There's a running theme through this conversation around budget challenges, and talent challenges, trying to figure out how to recruit, fill vacancies, all the resource needs that are the gaps require that we fill, and then hard choices. There was a time period in this city where we actually implemented a budgeting process whereby schools got the resources generated by their students, and that there was overhead taken by the district, but that decisions around position control, cuts, investments were all made at the site level. And they got rid of that. The reason why we went in that direction was, interestingly enough, when you talked about resource allocations, what we found back in the day was that schools that could fill their vacancies, that could actually fill their buildings, tended to actually be better resourced by a factor of almost 2 to 1. So you could have schools in the flatlands that had all these vacancies. They were allocated 1 FTE, but the FTE is a rotating, revolving sub that costs $200 a day, whereas the 23rd year veteran teacher sitting at Montclair cost the district $80,000 plus benefits. So that same FTE, if you think about that flatland school, Franklin, the position that same FTE at Montclair had, was a disproportionately inequitable, right, in terms of like how much money was being spent per student in that classroom at Franklin versus the one at Montclair.
Right.
We moved away from that system because of that equity audit around how much money we were spending per student across these schools so that we create greater equity. I'm curious, as we think about all of these challenges and trying to think outside the box around how we solve those challenges, and who should make those decisions when hard decisions have to get made. I mean, I'm curious how open you are to one, sort of an equity audit around how we are spending our money and who's getting the money. And then also this idea of like, if the equity audit shows some dramatic changes, a willingness to really shift the way we allocate resources to schools to address that. And then the second question would be, when it comes to cuts, would you support the idea of those closest to the students making those cuts versus sort of across the board central cuts? Right, you alluded to it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't support across the board central cuts. I think that's probably the kind of the easiest one to answer in the shortest amount of time. And I think again, we went through a process in 2019, and I was part of this group of parents organizing schools that were going to take a larger cut based on the equity index. Actually getting parents of those schools to sign onto a letter saying, yes, please, we will not fight this, even though like this is like the Peraltas of the world, the Chabots, the Crockers, I don't know if you were there at the time, Megan, but parents of those schools and teachers signed onto a letter saying, yes, we won't fight this cut, we agree that this is fair. And so I think that there's definitely a way in which when we talk about equity, that then implementing it does take organizing to make it actually go through instead of having like a huge backlash. And I think part of that was feeling like there was transparency in the district. So that'd be my one thing. I think in terms of, for me, transparency, I think in theory, very supportive of audits and being really, really clear about where we're spending our money. I would be curious, like just to hear about what Lisa Grant Dawson's opinion would be of that in terms of just, do we have that infrastructure in place to do an audit quickly? Would it be hiring a contractor? How much would that cost? Because I think given when we're talking about, it's always a challenge because sometimes those can be quite expensive. And so, but I also do think that there are ways in which we have to be creative moving forward. I do think there's also the other term, and another question around site-based decision-making, which I do support because I do think that those, the people closest to the programs know what's working best. And I think sometimes if you're not in a school, something can feel not student-facing, but actually is, right, like professional development centrally does really help enrich our programs. And that's not technically student-facing, but it is really deeply impactful to the work we're doing. So with that said, I think the other challenge is also around potentially streamlining some of the decisions for sites, because I think if any of you all have been on a school site council, sometimes you're in these meetings and you're thinking, this is the money that we're being allocated, and what could we do? And we ran into some of this a little bit with Prop 28 and even the community schools money around what could we spend this on? And then a lot of schools struggled to fill those positions and we lost money. And so I think that is there's that tension between community engagement and autonomy, and then what is really, what could we actually operationalize? And so I think having a bit less in terms of like, I'll take Prop 28 as like a very simple example. Instead of saying, like, our school, you could have any VAPA program. What VAPA program that doesn't exist right now could you have? And some people would say, oh, I'll have theater, or I'll have, symphonic music. But if you're only gonna get allocated a 0.2, then really you have to have an agreement amongst several schools to split that position up. And so I think as a district, that is an example of where we should be having an engagement with all schools, and maybe that goes through the PSAC as well as a separate standalone process around what are the kind of most desired programs from families and students, and then hiring for those positions, and then having a conversation around how do we then get those, so then instead it's like, okay, you can have theater or symphonic or dance, but you can't, it can't be guitar, if that makes sense. And so I think a lot of parents and students at schools struggled with that implementation of VAPA because it was, we didn't have a kind of an undergirding of actually hiring those positions. So I think that's the place where site-based decision-making, along with just the realities of hiring and onboarding and how long that process takes, needs to, and I think I will say, I say that on camera, it maybe is not the most popular position, because I think that there's a lot of desire for full site-based autonomy, but I do think that, and I think, again, this is my experience just as a parent and an organizer at lots of different schools in the district, that has come up again and again over the years of feeling like we wanted to do X program and we couldn't find a person, and so now we have no program. Does that answer your question?
So, Tom?
We can do maybe 2 quick follow-ups. Yeah, we have 4 minutes.
I'll try to be quicker. Sorry, I'm talking.
I know there have been some conversations, specifically around the time of the labor negotiations, that one of the challenges with the parents and families as sort of outsiders is that they're not involved in the negotiations of labor contracts that significantly impact their students, the outcomes, the quality of the school district. Would you be open to parent involvement in the negotiation process?
Yeah, I think I've heard that critique, and I think quite fairly from parents around how can we be actively involved in this negotiation. And I think I've heard the other district staff or central council saying, or the union saying, this is like a confidential negotiation, and so there's this, again, this tension of wanting to be really transparent, open with the community, and then understanding what are the ways we could make that work with both sides agreeing to that. Because sometimes I think they both kind of point the finger at each other because neither of them wants parents or students to really see what I mean. I think
right.
Just to be real. So I guess I would say I'm really open to having that conversation, and I think this is where I will try to be, I also want to agree to something that I also don't know the rules of. This is one of the ways in which, as a new board, I'll just say this, I'm very open to talking to anybody about that, and then I think, trying to be really honest about whatever people come back with. But I do think that there's an appetite for parents to be engaged, and I think, again, from a transparency point, it makes sense. So I would say definitely open to that.
Great, thanks.
That wasn't that quick, sorry.
Oh, that was
Do you have anything?
If I have time I have one quick question. We talked a lot about kind of the budget, and that'll be obviously a huge issue for whomever is on this board next. But another big looming thing is that the next board is likely to also be selecting a new superintendent, potentially. I think Superintendent Johnson Jamal has been the biggest asset for this district. I mean, she's certainly the longest serving and has been a stable, strong voice for rational thought at times, which sometimes doesn't exist on the board. And I think one of the challenges really is attracting candidates to Oakland because the discourse on our board has been so fractured. And so what would you do as a board member, and maybe, kind of pull from, other experiences and roles you've had in other jobs to kind of work with people who you may not agree with all the time, but to, again, make sure that Oakland students get a strong leader in place if and when, our superintendent leaves.
Yeah, I will say I'm I'm a nurse midwife and I worked in healthcare for a long time, and so have the privilege and also the challenge of working with people who, one, are in amazing experiences, growing their family or choosing how to start their family, and often really tragic circumstances or difficult circumstances. So that I think I have joked over the years that I think our board could go through some of those trainings around empathetic listening and not, kind of hearing where people are coming from and taking information in without feeling automatically attacked and wanting to respond without taking a beat. So I will say for me, that's one of my priorities is around, again, going to every space, even if it's spaces where I know I won't, people won't always agree, and really working quite hard and being open to feedback around my tone. And thirdly, also, I think, again, because I'm endorsed by OEA, I think that, there's like a assumption then that like the people who are endorsed by OEA are all like a clique and then they don't like talk to anyone else. But I think I get along quite well with Director Thompson and, have met several times with Director Hutchinson and feel confident that, whoever, I've met, I think except for Ben, which I guess we wouldn't be serving together. But I think I've worked with everyone else I've met with everyone else who's running, and do think that I could work with any board that got elected on this work, and would, I think, hold myself to try to move forward with more productive discourse. And I do think that there's also some ways in which, like, there was just a resolution last week around how we can tackle topics that comes up from the community to avoid the, the debacle that happened around the ceasefire resolution, and really the board meetings becoming even more contentious. And I think there's a way in which I think it's important for us to support free speech and communities bringing issues up, but also in a way that we can continue to move forward on board business. So that, because I think we all felt, whether people were supportive or wanted to talk about the ceasefire or not, we've missed 6 weeks of board meetings during budget development. So I think that's the other places around ways that we can be also be more strategic, so that we can have more efficient board meetings.
We are at time. Thank you so much.